Welcome, Mr. and Mrs. Today is Monday, it is the start of a new week. I am afraid this also is the worst day of the week, but we have to go through it together. And what we're looking at today is the recap of the raid situation so far. We have left the raid unattended in a corner for the longest time. We checked on Mythic Plus much earlier on because, as I said before, this season is going to have a more important weight put on Mythic Plus than it will have on the raid. Maybe there are some changes, maybe there are some improvements or some worsenings of the situations for the specs in the game. Now, to be fair, this doesn't really matter too much as this is not really too much of a competitive raid season. Dragonflight is looming closer. I'm pretty sure most people will likely very soon get more interested in the state of their specs in the beta and the alpha of Dragonflight rather than the current situation of the specs in Season 4, right? I'm pretty sure that if Shadow Priest somehow starts looking super good in the beta of Dragonflight, many more players are going to start looking into starting a priest by the end of this expansion in case they want to play it for next season, compared to just looking at the situation in Season 4 right now. Oh wow, Destruction is OP, let's just play this in Dragonflight as well. Yeah, I don't think that's gonna be the case, but still, let's take a look at how the raid has gone in the last almost couple of weeks since we checked by the end of Season 3. We have gone through the entire week of Castor Nathria, and the entire week of Castor Nathria ended like this. Out of the surprising things across this entire list is the look at the bottom, the quite bright look at the bottom because it's all yellow. It's both Assassination and Subtlety being the worst performing specs of Castor Nathria, with a complete opposite, a complete switcheroo in Outlaw being in the top 3. We have a very even situation for mages, quite balanced actually. Fire, Arcane and Frost are all towards the middle in their results. Same goes for Frost and Unholy. Frost is a little bit further ahead past the half of the DPS, whereas Unholy is a little bit lower down the bottom half. As usual, we continue this bizarre world where Feral has been consistently above Balanced Druid for almost the entire expansion, yet it continues to be played by absolutely nobody, and Balanced Druid continues to be one of the most popular of range DPS in the raid. Another continuous unlucky situation is for Havoc, which has not had too much of a bright expansion, we can say. They have lost one of their mainstay spots in Mythic Plus compared to BFA. They have been taken over by Rogue, which already was popular, and then Windwalker Monk, and then later on even Survival Hunter. They haven't really been able to keep that spot in the raid either. They haven't really been that performing in the raid. They are saved by the fact that they have a mandatory raid debuff, the magical damage debuff for the raid, and saved by the fact that Vengeance is not historically a very popular tank for the raids. So they still can keep their cozy one spot in the raid, but overall it's not been too much of a successful expansion, I would say, for Havoc Demon Hunter. Last of the interesting situations in Castor Nathria was the difference, the gap between marksmanship and the newly buffed Beast Mastery Hunter that has now gone much higher up. Still not great, okay, still not like the top of the top when it comes to damage, but certainly in a much better situation than they have been all expansion pretty much when it comes to the raid. The other specs are basically where they were supposed to be. Demo is still towards the top, the nerf Destruction, what a surprise, is still towards the top. Survival, Elemental and Affliction, as we said last time, surprisingly is also towards the top. Now, the comparison with this week of Sanctum of Domination. Now, surprising points. Surprising points is that Elemental makes it even further beyond what they were before. Now they are actually second as a surprise, and Destruction actually falls quite a lot compared to Castor Nathria, at the very least right now. Much lower down compared to their usual top spots that they have kept since Season 3. Just to point out how volatile this season is, just to point out how weird the rankings can be when you go week by week in different raids, the two bottom specs that used to be Rogue are now much farther up. Assassination makes up some 7 spots, and Subtlety even more. They even get into the top half in Sanctum. The result is that the previously mentioned Feral Druid and Balanced Druid, being often quite far apart in terms of performance, are now the 2 bottom specs. Who doesn't move across all of this is all the way to the top, where Demo is still there, still unmoved, and Havoc Demon Hunter is still down there in the 3rd to last place, unmoved. Of the 3 mage specs, we said mage was still towards the middle in Nathria, with Arcane in the middle and then Frost a little bit lower down and Fire a little bit higher up. In Sanctum it's the same, except the gap is even larger, further apart, because now Fire is doing significantly better than the other 2 mage specs. Less of a difference between the 2 DK specs and also farther up than last week in Nathria, and the largest jump in the entire week, in the entire raid, in terms of rankings goes to Fury Warrior. They went from bottom, basically, together with Arms, all the way towards the top, in fact, top 7 in Sanctum. This also, with the item level increases and the loot, players might start to get some juicy trinkets or some juicy weapons from Sanctum of Domination. Perhaps, for example, the jump in Subtlety Rogue might be attributed to them being able to get the Sylvanas Dagger, and then maybe even with the tokens. After defeating 20 heroic bosses, they can get the token to upgrade an item to heroic item level, so perhaps they can also upgrade a dagger they found in LFR or in normal difficulty up to heroic. Items like Old Warrior Soul, for example, for Fury Warrior or for the DK specs, is now available from Sylvanas. And then even next week there might be something interesting changing in the power of the specs because of the dinar. Next week is when you will get to defeat the 30th boss of this season, which means you get to buy your first dinar, which means you get to hand pick the weapon or the trinket of your choice. So that also might give us some more jumps in power of the different specs, but for the moment this is what we had for the raid. I guess across all of the volatility, across all of the very shaky rankings, depending on the myriad of bosses we will get to deal with in this season, from Nathria to Sanctum to Sepulchre, it's like what, 31 bosses? Out of all of this, one of the few safe bets, if we can just gauge the results from the first 2 raids of this season, is that Demo, Elemental, Outlaw, Windwalker and Survival are all consistently towards the top, no matter the different raid, and specs like Balanced Druid, Havoc Demon Hunter, Frost Mage, Assassination Rogue and Arms Warrior are towards the bottom. Many of the other specs, on the other hand, are much more up and down, much more volatile in their performance. It's gonna differ a lot boss from boss, even just in Sanctum, for example. You have the classic difference that we used to check all those months ago when looking at Sanctum progress. The difference in, for example, Guardian of the First Ones, which is a pure single target boss, and Soul Render, which is a boss with tons of adds. So the different bosses are going to make different specs shine based on what they do best. As usual, even a year later, Windwalker Monk is still the king of Soul Render damage because of the lots of AoE. Even Marksmanship Hunters with their Wild Spirits burst is now much higher on Soul Render, whereas when you look at Guardian of the First Ones, it's gonna be pure single target. So Enhancement, Fire Mage, Demo Lock, and even the good old Feral Druid and Assassination Rogue make their way back at the top of the rankings. So different bosses will give you a different outlook in the way the specs are performing. Of course, the overall all bosses is going to give you the general picture of how the specs are doing. It's also worth mentioning, in case people might get the wrong idea. You know, it doesn't mean much, I understand, but in case people think that this is just so out of balance for Demo, this is also due to the fact that Demonology is the spec that gets power infusion. You can even go one step further and start comparing, for example, the results in the logs of Demonology Warlocks who are getting power infusion versus the Demolocks who are not getting power infusion. And you know, a power infusion-less Demolock would actually be towards the 7th to 8th place in the overall rankings right now, compared to the place they are at the moment, which is the spot of the beneficiary of all the power infusions in your raid. So That is also a quite significant leg up that Demo has right now on all specs, and that is also why so many players, so many specs can be quite frustrated at the idea, as we saw 1 month ago with the release and the reveal of the Priest talent trees for Dragonflight, that Power Infusion is still going to be in the game in Dragonflight, so very likely this situation in the rankings will repeat itself. But that's another discussion, that's off topic, that's gonna be for a different time. Now we're just looking at the current situation in the raid. So this has been so far the first 2 weeks when it comes to the performance of the specs. Of course, it is much different to gauge the performance of the healers, I'm sure you all know, but just going by rankings and the overall results right now, easily the strongest one is Resto Druid, by quite a large margin. Resto Druid was already the strongest, also by quite a large margin in the last season, because they had a lot of HPS, but they didn't really offer too much. So when it came to actual progression, when it came to actual tough moments in a fight, you wanted Spirit Link, you wanted Barrier, you wanted Symbol of Hope, even Aura Mastery and Devotion Aura. So the Resto Druid was never the pick, because HPS, yes, it's cool, but as long as the bosses have such dangerous phases where you want damage reduction, Resto Druid is not that powerful overall. This tier, however, essentially the feeling, if you guys have raided in Mythic in this new season, the feeling is like progressing on bosses as if we were in a normal season, but 3 months in. So if we already are 20 something item level above, if we already have gotten a couple of round of nerfs on all the bosses, so it feels like all of that initial first weeks of the bosses being very dangerous, of many mechanics being perhaps even overtuned and hitting a lot, meaning that you need defensives and damage reduction much more, doesn't seem as needed in this season, which makes HPS specs be the strongest ones in this tier, which is why Resto Druid is gapping other healers in fights by 20-30+% of the total healing, because it is much better performing when it comes to that. So this has been the to-go situation when it comes to healers. Holy Priest is still the more popular one, Resto Shaman is still the second one, and Resto Druid is still the third one. But overall, if it comes to just pure healing, this is the season perhaps where we have the largest gap amongst healers, with Resto Druid being at the top. We can finish with the popularity. These are the two raids. The first is Castor Nathria, the second one is this week of Sanctum. Of course, there isn't much difference, obviously, between 1 week and the next. Most of the classes are going to be exactly where they already were the week before, except with some swaps of the specs, in case of having multiple specs being viable for different encounters. Of course, many questions remain on the continued popularity of Balanced Druid, even in this tier. More surprising, perhaps, is the popularity of Shadow Priest. Given that they are not really meta, given that they are not really that powerful, the fact that at the moment they are the 5th most played range DPS, after Demo, Beast Mastery, Balance, and Fire Mage. Perhaps I was expecting it a little bit lower down, but overall, this is all we can see and all you can gauge from this week of Sanctum of Domination. Now, with this being said, we can actually leave. We have gotten far deeper along this video than I intended. As usual, I have no gift of synthesis when it comes to my videos. A round of applause, as usual, to all of my Patreon supporters. Thank you very much, all of you. This is a good part in what allows me to continue to produce videos for WoW content as we get deeper and deeper into Season 4 of Shadowlands and into the Alpha of Dragonflight, of which, as usual, I am still the president of the No Alpha organization, but eventually we will get into the beta and we will get even more juicy content to report on. Also, for further support, you guys can like and comment down below, as well as subscribe to the channel itself. That would be quite appreciated. Lastly, for more sticky and clingy behavior, you can follow me on Twitter, as day after day I get more disappointed by the tweets of several WoW personalities really letting me down. So if you want to have someone who actually knows what he's talking about, please go ahead and follow me over there, as well as subscribing to my Patreon down at these two links over there. Much appreciated as well. With this being said, we can now stop and leave each other on this Monday. Thank you guys again for watching. See you guys soon, And in the meantime, what a good feeling. What a good feeling when you have done your errands, you're chilling, laying down in front of your monitor, ready to watch something, and then you realize you left something in your living room and you have to get up to go and take it. I don't want to.